0347 hours, Gulf of Venezuela, 92 nautical miles northwest of Puerto Cabello. The S-31 Sabalo slipped beneath the thermocline at 400 feet. Her diesel engines were cold and silent. Inside the submarine, 38 men breathed recycled air that tasted faintly of copper and sweat. They had been submerged for 19 hours, waiting. Captain Ernesto Vargas pressed his face close to the periscope housing while watching the passive sonar display slowly build a picture in the darkness of the ocean. 14 kilometers to the northeast, a growing wall of sound moved through the water, propeller cavitation from several massive screws. The unmistakable acoustic fingerprint of a Nimitz-class aircraft carrier, the USS George Washington. This was supposed to be impossible. American carriers rarely operated this close to Venezuelan waters, but satellite intelligence had confirmed it. 3 days earlier, the George Washington had shifted course from her southern patrol and started moving north through the Caribbean. Her strike group was stretched thin across nearly 200 nautical miles. Vargas checked the fire control solution one more time. 2 SST-4 torpedoes were loaded in tubes 1 and 2. German-made, wire-guided weapons capable of traveling 20 nautical miles at 23 knots. His orders were simple: fire, then disappear. What Caracas never mentioned was that the George Washington never traveled alone. 12 hours earlier, a Boeing P-8 Poseidon had lifted off from Naval Air Station Jacksonville. Call sign Hunter 71. The aircraft climbed to 28,000 feet and settled into a patrol orbit roughly 300 miles northeast of Venezuela. Its crew of 9 immediately began seeding the ocean with sonobuoys. 112 acoustic sensors dropped into the water in a grid covering nearly 40 square miles. Passive buoys listened quietly for machinery noise. Active buoys sent pulses through the water and waited for echoes. Multi-static arrays created overlapping detection zones capable of picking up even the faintest underwater movement. At 1:15, the first contact appeared, a faint diesel signature matching a Type 209 submarine. Operators tracked it for 6 minutes before confirming the identification: S-31 Sabalo. Bearing 273, speed 4 knots, depth 350 feet, the P-8 transmitted the contact through an encrypted data link to the carrier strike group. Within seconds, the information reached the Combat Information Center aboard the USS Porter, an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer positioned 12 nautical miles off the George Washington's starboard side. Commander Jennifer Walsh studied the tactical display carefully. The submarine was attempting a classic approach, hiding within the thermal layer to mask its sound while slowly creeping into torpedo range. It was a textbook Cold War maneuver. The problem for Captain Vargas was simple. Cold War tactics do not work well against 21st century sensors. Walsh ordered the ship to general quarters. The AN/S QQ-89 anti-submarine warfare system activated immediately. The hull-mounted sonar began active scanning while the TB-37 towed array dropped beneath the thermocline. Now the Americans could observe the submarine from below. What had been a shadow zone for the Sabalo had suddenly become a spotlight. At 0322, 2 MH-60R Seahawk helicopters lifted off from the Porter's flight deck. Each carried 4 Mark 54 lightweight torpedoes and a dipping sonar capable of scanning deep into the ocean layers. The Venezuelan submarine was now inside a carefully built trap. All that remained was waiting for Vargas to make his move. Inside the Sabalo, the atmosphere had changed. Sweat dripped slowly from overhead pipes. The sonar operator reported a new contact. Helicopter rotors, then another and another. 3 helicopters circling above at medium altitude, lowering dipping sonar systems into the water and probing the depths with clinical precision. Vargas felt the first sharp wave of doubt. 3 helicopters meant detection. Standard American doctrine usually assigned 2 helicopters per submarine contact. 3 meant they were leaving nothing to chance. He checked the range to the carrier again. 14,000 yards, still outside the optimal torpedo envelope. The SST-4 could reach that far, but wire guidance became unreliable past 10,000 yards. Beyond that point, the torpedo would switch to autonomous mode, essentially swimming toward the target without precise guidance, while facing the most advanced defensive systems at sea. His executive officer leaned closer. "Captain, they know we're here." Vargas nodded slowly. There were only 2 options now: abort the mission and attempt to slip away, or fire immediately and accept whatever followed. Caracas had already made the political decision. The military choice now belonged to him. At 3:48, Captain Ernesto Vargas ordered tubes 1 and 2 flooded. Water rushed into the torpedo tubes, echoing through the submarine like a distant rumble. Launching a torpedo is not silent. The compressed air ejection creates a sharp acoustic spike that travels rapidly through the water. To the hydrophones aboard the USS Porter, it sounded like a cannon blast. Torpedo in the water, bearing 273, range 12,000 yards. Commander Walsh had 43 seconds to react. She didn't need that long. The destroyer immediately deployed the AN/SLQ-25 Nixie from its stern, a towed decoy designed to imitate the amplified acoustic signature of a ship's propellers. To a torpedo's guidance system, it sounded irresistible. The Venezuelan torpedo detected two possible targets. It chose the louder one. At the same moment, the Porter's Mark 32 torpedo tubes launched their own response. Two Mark 54 lightweight torpedoes entered the water, their active seekers quickly acquiring the Sabalo's hull above. Hunter 71 dropped 3 additional sonobuoys to refine the tracking solution. On the P-8's tactical display, the geometry was brutally clear. The Venezuelan torpedo chasing the decoy to the east, American torpedoes racing toward the submarine from the west. Captain Vargas heard the incoming weapons even before his sonar operator confirmed them. A sharp rising whine. Active seekers pinging against the hull, searching, confirming, locking. He ordered emergency speed. The Sabalo's electric motor pushed the submarine to 21 knots, its maximum. The Mark 54 torpedoes were closing at 40 knots. Numbers like that leave little room for negotiation. At 0351, the first torpedo struck the Sabalo's stern. The shaped charge warhead detonated against the pressure hull at a depth of 370 feet, where water pressure was already immense. The blast tore open a massive breach in the engine room. Seawater flooded inside at nearly 90,000 gallons per minute. The submarine pitched sharply downward as the weight of the flooding shifted its balance. Emergency blow systems activated, forcing high-pressure air into the ballast tanks. It wasn't enough. 11 seconds later, the second torpedo struck near the center of the submarine. The combined damage was devastating. At roughly 420 feet, the Sabalo's pressure hull collapsed. All 38 crew members were lost instantly. From the moment the torpedoes were launched to the final outcome, the entire engagement lasted just 3 minutes and 14 seconds. Meanwhile, the Venezuelan torpedo continued chasing the Nixie decoy for another 6,000 yards before losing its guidance connection. It switched to autonomous mode, circled twice, and eventually ran out of fuel before sinking into the depths. Cost of the decoy, $87,000. Cost of the submarine it helped defeat, about $160 million. But the Sabalo was not alone. And the most dangerous part of the story was only beginning. What happens when 18 missile boats attempt to swarm an aircraft carrier? The answer might surprise you. If you want to see what happens next in stories like this, make sure you like the video and subscribe so you don't miss part 2. September 23, 2025. 3:55 hours. Gulf of Venezuela, aboard the USS George Washington. Just 3 minutes earlier, the Venezuelan submarine Sabalo had launched 2 torpedoes toward the American carrier. Now the submarine rested on the ocean floor at a depth of 420 feet. 38 sailors gone inside a vessel that never truly had a realistic chance of completing its mission. But the Sabalo had never been meant to act alone. Radar operators aboard the George Washington suddenly detected a new group of contacts. 18 small surface targets moving quickly from the southeast at 42 knots. Venezuelan PKAP-3 missile boats, Iranian-designed fast attack craft equipped with C-802 anti-ship missiles. This was Phase 2 of Operation Bolivarian Thunder. The idea behind the plan was simple. While the submarine drew the attention of American anti-submarine forces, the missile boats would race toward launch range under the cover of darkness. A swarm attack, relying on numbers and speed to overwhelm the defensive systems protecting the carrier. But the plan contained one critical weakness. American satellites had already been watching Puerto Cabello harbor. 12 hours earlier, they had tracked the missile boats leaving port and moving into open water. By the time the attack group formed up, the U.S. Navy already knew it was coming. 40 nautical miles south of the carrier, the USS Gravely, a Flight II, a Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, had been quietly tracking the entire formation since it entered international waters. Her Aegis combat system had already generated firing solutions for all 18 targets. The only question left was when to engage. At 4:02, the Venezuelan formation reached a distance of 50 nautical miles from the carrier, the maximum launch range for the C-802 missiles. The lead boats began activating their targeting radars. That moment became the point of no return. On the Gravelly's bridge, the captain watched the tactical display fill with threat markers. The missile boat split into two separate groups, attempting a flanking maneuver, a classic tactic inherited from older Soviet naval doctrine. He authorized weapons release. 96 vertical launch cells stood ready. Within seconds, 16 RIM-162 evolved Sea Sparrow missiles launched into the early morning sky. Their rocket motors burned bright against the darkness as they accelerated toward their assigned targets. Each missile locked onto a different boat. The Aegis system managed the engagement automatically, constantly adjusting flight paths to maximize the chances of intercept. The Venezuelan crews had only a few seconds to realize what was happening. They never had time to react. The first missile struck at 4:03. A 38-foot missile boat racing across the water at full speed vanished in a violent burst of fire and debris scattered across hundreds of meters of ocean. The second hit followed less than 2 seconds later. Then a third. Then more. Within moments, the southeastern horizon lit up with multiple explosions as missile after missile found its target. 14 boats were destroyed in the first wave. 4 survivors attempted to turn south and escape at maximum speed. 2 were intercepted by additional missiles. The remaining pair fled at full throttle, sending desperate distress signals back toward Caracas. None of the Venezuelan missiles were ever launched. Many detonated inside their own launch tubes as fires consumed the damaged boats. The entire engagement lasted 47 seconds. American losses? None. By 4:30, the George Washington's Combat Air Patrol had formed a protective screen across the northern approaches. 4 FA-18 Super Hornets flew racetrack patterns at 25,000 feet, their powerful radars scanning the Venezuelan coastline for additional threats. None appeared. Operation Bolivarian Thunder had exhausted its entire force in a single disastrous encounter. 1 submarine, 18 missile boats, more than 300 sailors, all lost within less than an hour. The financial impact was equally severe. Venezuela had committed an estimated $620 million in military assets. The American response required roughly $43 million worth of missiles and defensive systems, a ratio that military analysts would study for years. At 6:15, the George Washington simply continued her planned transit north. Flight operations resumed as normal. Aircraft launched and recovered from the flight deck as if nothing unusual had happened. The carrier did not change course. It did not accelerate. No emergency measures were needed. Because in reality, the carrier had never been in serious danger. The defensive network protecting a carrier strike group extends hundreds of miles outward. Patrol aircraft like the P-8 Poseidon monitor enormous areas of ocean. Submarines operate silently beneath thermal layers. Destroyers and cruisers form overlapping rings of sensors and defensive weapons. By the time any threat approaches the carrier itself, it has already been detected, tracked, identified, and assigned to a response system. Captain Vargas had believed he was the hunter. In reality, from the moment the Sabalo left port, American sensors had been observing every movement. The Venezuelan government announced the losses 3 days later. State television blamed foreign aggression, but satellite imagery told a different story. Analysts could clearly see the flooded torpedo tubes of the Sabalo at the moment it was destroyed. The attack had been real, and the response had been overwhelming. In Washington, defense analysts compiled the after-action report. 17 pages long, it ended with a single conclusion. Venezuela attempted a surprise strike against one of the most heavily defended naval assets on Earth. The outcome was never truly in doubt. The numbers spoke for themselves. Over $620 million in Venezuelan equipment lost. Approximately $43 million in American defensive expenditure. 312 Venezuelan sailors gone, 0 American casualties, 1 Type 2 09 submarine resting on the seabed, 16 missile boats reduced to wreckage, and a Nimitz-class aircraft carrier continuing its mission without interruption. This is the reality of modern naval warfare. A diesel submarine designed in the 1970s had attempted to challenge a battle network built to counter the most advanced naval forces in the world. The result had been decided long before the first torpedo entered the water. Some military theorists argue that smaller nations can defeat powerful militaries through clever asymmetric tactics, that creativity and determination can overcome technological superiority. The Gulf of Venezuela offered a different lesson. There is no clever tactic against a surveillance network that detects you the moment you leave port. No favorable outcome when your entire strike force disappears in less than a minute. And no victory in sending hundreds of sailors into a situation they cannot survive. the George Washington continued toward its next destination. Crew members filed reports, maintained equipment, and returned to the routine life of a floating city at sea. By evening, the entire engagement had already become a brief note in operational logs. But somewhere in Caracas, military planners faced empty chairs and difficult questions. They studied satellite images of scattered wreckage and calculated the enormous cost of replacing 18 missile boats and a submarine, a loss that represented a large portion of their naval capability. And they were left with a lesson every Navy eventually learns. You do not challenge an aircraft carrier without understanding what stands behind it. Because when you confront the wrong ship, there may be no opportunity to reconsider. The oceans remember every mistake, and the Gulf of Venezuela remembers the sailors who sailed into a situation they never realized had already been decided. If this story gave you a new perspective on modern naval warfare, share it with someone who would find it interesting. And subscribe so you never miss the next story.